is the strategies that we might use as opposition teams. John had quite a detailed look at how you might rebut particular arguments and how you might deal with the argumentation that's put forward by the opposition. So today we're going to look at things as a bit more of a whole. What do we do both in the prep room to start with when we know the motion, and then also perhaps during the debate to decide what our whole team line is going to be, what our approach is going to be as an opposition team. Well, the first thing that I know you wanted me to talk about a bit was dealing with definitions. Either definitions that are illegal that we have to expect challenge them, or definitions that are just a bit difficult and where we might not be happy with the way the debate's going. And after we do that, we'll have a little look at counter proposals, and then we will play a fun game about coming up with opposition strategies. Okay? So first thing then, what were the two types of definition that we said were illegal? Basically, yeah, tautologies and truisms. So you have to decide, what am I going to do if I'm presented with a definition which is a tautology or a truism? Well, first of all, check to see if it is actually a tautology or a truism. Really think about whether or not there are grounds for you to argue within what the team has presented as their definition. Even if you think that the definition has been presented in a way that makes it unarguable, it probably hasn't been done so really, really clearly. Okay? Proposition teams know they're not supposed to present these kinds of definitions and know that they're likely to lose if they do. Often it's because perhaps they're a bit dim, okay, or they've got really confused, or they haven't understood some of the words, or they've described something really, really badly. So they present something that sounds like it's tautological, or sounds like it's unarguable, but actually that's not really what they intended. So, if, for example, they've defined something in a tautological way, they've said, we believe that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, an example I used from the other day. They probably won't have clearly and absolutely said, and all we mean by a terrorist is someone who fights for freedom, therefore we win. They might have implied that, they might have said that in one way or another, but they probably won't have stated it in an absolute and outright and clear way, because then it would be fairly obvious even if you wrote to them. Probably what they've done is they've tried to say terrorists have the aims of liberating people, terrorists are freedom fighters. They've not asserted these things. But that doesn't mean that you can't then say, okay, look, we understand that terrorists are people who claim to fight for freedom. A lot of the times the terrorist organisations exist, they'll have declarations of high-sounding principles. Let's look at what they actually do, though, and we'll soon discover that they don't fight for freedom. They, seek power for one group, or they intimidate people, or they get involved in organised crime, whatever it is. So simply by shifting the area of argument, you can usually get them to agree on what a terrorist is. I mean, for a start, ask them for examples if they don't give any points of information. Okay, say, sorry, are there any terrorist organisations that you're going to include then? If you say that there are any people who specifically and solely fight for the liberty of a particular group. And if they say, yes, I think the ANC was an example of someone who only fought for liberty, or I think the IRA or whatever is an organisation that's only fought for freedom of certain people, then you've got some examples. And about real examples, you can have a real argument, okay? Even if it's a difficult argument. Even if you think, well, actually, that would be quite like the ANC, there are still things that you can say about their methods being illegitimate or about whatever. That means that you do have an argument there. So as long as they're arguing about something real, which is at least vaguely within the area of the definition, then you're going to be able to, without explicitly challenging the definition, point out to them that what they really meant by the definition was some particular examples of terrorist groups, perhaps even the nicest terrorist groups, but nevertheless something that you can argue about. Any questions about that? Is that kind of clear that usually they haven't intended to be tautological? So have a look at what they were really getting at, what they probably were trying to do, even if it makes their job easier, and it becomes basically just a narrow definition. Yeah, everybody have that? Okay, good. I mean, we'll look at narrow definitions. If they propose something that is truistic, something that isn't logically true, so it's not about widening the definition of terms, but it's just factually true, that's usually, again, a mistake that really they've only made one type of argument. Okay, so the motion that was phrased initially controversially becomes uncontroversial because they've limited it to one particular area of argument. So, for example, this isn't a particularly likely motion to get, but it illustrates it quite well. If we're arguing this House believes that France is a royalist country, or a Republican country, I suppose we have to say, if we were making sure there was a proposition. France is a Republican country. Clearly the motion setters want you to talk about the character of the French people, whether or not they are naturally Republican and sort of revolutionary and all this kind of stuff. And if the proposition says, well, France is obviously a Republican country because they have a president. They don't have a king, they have a president, that's the definition of a republic. Therefore, they must be a Republican country, that's what it means. Well, that's kind of one argument. Like the fact that France has a president is one argument for why it might be a Republican country. But you can set up and say, okay, what other factors might make a country Republican? Well, the depth of democratic engagement, or the access to the top positions, or no snobbery, no class system, not elitism, all this kind of stuff. And you can then bring in other arguments, okay, which effectively again kind of widens the sense of what a Republican is, and gives other reasons why France might not be Republican. Or you can look back in history and say they were very Republican when they restored the monarchy twice after the revolution, all this kind of stuff. So again, it's about taking what the other side has given you, not necessarily just ditching it and chucking it out and saying, no, we've got to start this whole debate again from first principles, we're going to ignore everything you said, because that is likely to generate this kind of definitional debate where they just jump what you said and go back to what they said initially. But to try and convince the proposition that actually they did present an arguable debate, it wasn't very good and you're going to show them why it was wrong, but essentially you're kind of bigging up their side and making it easier for them to engage as a proposition team. Because otherwise, of course, you're not going to be able to engage as a proposition team. So it's in your interests to make sure that they can be interpreted as presenting something that makes the debate arguable. So we're going to do like that. Okay. Narrow or problematic definitions then. Definitions that leave out key areas of argument which later come into play, definitions which are about a small portion of the area that you were expecting to discuss, about one country perhaps instead of the whole world, or that limit the scope of the definition to a certain age group, or heavily restricted, or whatever. Well, basically you just say, gosh, what an unexpectedly narrow definition. You haven't really made your job very difficult, have you? However, you're still wrong. That is the point at which you just continue to argue what they've presented and what they've defined. There's no point in redefining. There's no point in trying to be a better proposition than the proposition by saying, look, what you really should have done was argue that this was true everywhere in the world for the following reasons, because you actually almost start making a proposition case if you're going to do that. It's very confusing for the judges that you are making a better proposition case simply in order then to be able to knock it down in a debate where the proposition is stronger, but where you've done some of the job of the proposition. So just say, gosh, this is a rather unusual way. I can't imagine why you would only want to make all illegal drugs legal. For people over the age of 95, once they've got 3 doctor's prescriptions and applied to Parliament and a special dispensation has been given them, and then it'll only be marijuana that's been grown organically in the Netherlands. How many people is that going to affect? But even so, the principle is outrageous, and then go on and make some of the arguments you'd be able to make normally, even if effectively they've tried to allow no scope for debate. You've got to go back to first principles. You've got to argue, first of all, either that what they're doing just is so unimportant that why would we bother to do it when there are bound to be some harms. Usually principled harms are a kind of a constant, set thing. They're always the same, and the practical benefits are going to be reduced when they narrow their case. Or say, well, we've been told that we would legalise all the drugs. The proposition has given us a very, very good argument for why we should legalise marijuana. I'm going to take issue with that. I'm also going to go on to explain why we certainly shouldn't legalise any other types of drugs as well. If they stand up and say, well, we didn't say we legalise any other types of drugs, you'd say, well, no, it's such a bad idea, you didn't even argue for it, but I'm still going to put in a few reasons just to broaden my case, just to back up what I'm saying, why legalising other drugs are bad as well. And of course that illustrates the principles of why legalising marijuana is bad. And remember, that's fine, okay? In some formats of debate, if the proposition says legalise all drugs means legalise marijuana, that's an absolutely rigidly set grounds for debate. And if you do bring up things about legalising cocaine, they will quite rightly just say, not in the debate, we didn't define it. But in world schools, if you bring up something about why it's bad to legalise cocaine in the debate where the motion is this has to legalise all drugs, that's fine, even if the other guys have really only talked about marijuana legalisation. Okay? This is what happened in a final in Singapore in 2002. You had Australia a proposition, Ireland an opposition, and the motion was this House believes that the media has too much power. And Australia basically said, yep, because they invade people's privacy. And we're going to talk about how the media has this power to kind of ruin people's lives, make celebrities miserable, and expose politicians' scandals which have nothing to do with their private life, because they have this incredibly intrusive power. And Ireland said, look, that's all very interesting, we don't agree with that, but nor do we agree that the media has too much power in, for example, the way that it's owned. We don't believe that it has too much power over policy or influence, because look at all these examples where media campaigns have been thwarted or where there's responsibility in the media. And the Australians said, no, that's really nothing to do with what we're talking about. And then I said, yeah, but it is to do with the motion, so we're still going to bring it in. These are still powerful arguments for why the media is a really good thing, and why, in fact, in some places it doesn't have enough power. Look at all these countries where there isn't enough media scrutiny. And the Irish one, quite clearly, the judge said in his summary at the end when he was announcing the verdict, which I think was a sort of 6-1 split or something, that it was really because the Australians had only used one argument rather than defining the debate down to one area that they haven't won. So you can use arguments that are within the motion if someone defines narrowly or problematically. But that doesn't mean that you're challenging their definition. You're just saying, thanks to that definition, it's very interesting, it's wrong, and some other stuff. So is everybody happy now that they know how they deal with difficult definitions? I mean, as I say, like ideally you really shouldn't get them, because you're also learning how to be prop, right? And in prop, you just want to go for the biggest, broadest, straightforwardest, most controversial definition you can. But yeah.
I don't really get it. So like the proposition defines the motion and then extremely narrowly. You will come up and say that it's narrow, and then you just ignore the definition and start talking about what is within the boundaries, like the general boundaries of this motion.
Well, I'm not saying you'd ignore the definition. I'm saying you first of all say, okay, so the Australians have come here and they have said that the media has too much power. That was very interesting. What they said about the media having too much power was that it invades people's privacy. Okay, this was how they decided to define their debate. I have other ways, because the motion has a normal English everyday meaning, right? And that's what it means in world schools. Motions have and always maintain their everyday English meaning in world schools. So you say, well, that's very interesting. The Australians have presented one reason, in other words, their definition, why the media has too much power. I've got loads of reasons why the media doesn't have enough power. What about scrutiny? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't argue against what they've said. It is, after all, still a reason why the media has too much power. In fact, you should probably spend the majority of your time arguing against what they've said, okay? Because you are, after all, an opposition. But at the same time, that doesn't preclude you from bringing in arguments you might have pre-prepared. The Australians then have to decide whether or not to defend themselves against your attacks and effectively allow the debate to be broadened out, which is what happened in this debate, but it was a bit late because they had one speech where they didn't talk about those other things at all. Or to carry on ignoring them, in which case you're winning on a whole swathe of areas. You should reduce the amount of time you spend on them, but certainly in every speech continue mentioning them, and saying in second and third speeches, oh, well, I noticed they still haven't told us why the media should be given why shouldn't be given more power in countries to scrutinise things. That seems a bit odd for a team that thinks the media has too much power. Anyway, back to rebutting their privacy points. So I'm not saying that you should ignore their definition or you should start the debate again, but you should say, good, okay, we've got most of the debate here, that's fine, we're going to have that debate, and there are some other things that we can do here perfectly legitimately to talk about the motion. But it should never dominate. But let's assume that in a first op speech you're going to be doing kind of 5 minutes, say, of constructive material and 3 minutes of rebuttal anyway, and that rebuttal is going to increase. That still means that your absolute minimum of time you spend on their case is going to be 3 minutes, okay? And if you include some of your constructive matter as being about privacy as well, you're spending probably more than half your time in the first opposition speech, and then that time increases throughout the rest of the debate, dealing with what the proposition has presented. So I'm certainly not suggesting that you ignore their stuff to the extent that you spend like 7 or 8 minutes on your own definition of the motion. But that doesn't mean you can't bring in other arguments. Okay? Right. So 2 things now. First of all, we're going to look at another way that oppositions often respond. We're going to look at counter propositions. In other words, plans where you decide that you're going to be like the proposition, but as if the motion was slightly different. So you're actually going to propose some course of action. And we're going to look at what things what sort of criteria those counter propositions have to meet if they're going to be worthwhile. Okay, before we go on to the fun game. So first of all, have a think about whether or not this counter proposal is short enough that you can include it and still deal with the plan that has been presented by the proposition. What you don't want to do is fill up your whole time with proposing something that, after all, as we're going to see in a second, might not even work or be entirely relevant. But even assuming it is relevant, and even assuming it is quite a clever thing to present, you've still got to spend most of your time by the end of the debate, and a reasonable amount of it at the start, rebutting what has been presented to you by the proposition. Effectively, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, first of all, I've got to knock down the propositions x, like John told you, they present this x, and you're going to present negative x, okay? And often you go on to present negative x plus, negative x negative, I guess it would be, by having a constructive case, okay, which is usually built along the lines of imagining your proposition in a motion that's just phrased the opposite, okay? So they come up here and they say we should ban all alcohol, okay? You're going to spend some of your time saying why their reasons to ban alcohol are very, very bad, okay? You're then going to spend some of your time, if you're an ordinary straightforward opposition, in spending some time making totally new arguments that are standalone arguments that don't rely on anybody having said anything against them. Why we should not ban alcohol. So if the motion were, this House would not ban alcohol, and you were proposition, you'd be coming up with those arguments de novo, right? You'd be coming up with them in the prep room and you present them without reference to anybody else's arguments. And you can do the same thing on opposition too. Just come up with arguments why the motion's wrong, as well as reasons why the proposition is wrong. But you could go a bit further and you could say, well, maybe part of the way that we're going to show that it is not necessary to ban alcohol, and part of the way that we're going to deal with their accusations that alcohol causes all these problems in society is by maybe restricting alcohol or making alcohol more expensive, putting lots of tax on it or something, which is another way of solving some of their problems. So first of all, is it short enough? Like, are you going to spend most of your time describing how you're going to put tax on alcohol and not really spending any time on why we shouldn't ban it? Because remember, the proposition could say, well, look, that's like a halfway house towards our arguments, but our arguments are even better, and you haven't really told us why they're wrong. You just spent a lot of time talking about tax regime. Well, you know, that's very interesting, but not really anything to do with the debate. So first of all, it's got to be short. Second, it's got to be necessary. Right? Is it really necessary in this debate that you acknowledge that alcohol causes horrendous problems? In some debates, it's going to be almost impossible to claim that there's nothing wrong. So we saw that in the debate about Jerusalem yesterday. You can't really say, Jerusalem is fine. I don't know why you bother doing anything about it, we just leave it, yeah? You can't really say that. So in those cases, it's sometimes handy to have something that you think ought to be done in the East. Now, I was saying to the opposition team in the debate I saw yesterday that it wasn't absolutely essential for them to present a counter-proposal. They can say we don't like the status quo, and we don't know what to do about it, but what we do know is that your proposal will make things worse. Okay, that's fine, but it can strengthen your case then to say, actually what we need to be doing is working towards a two-state solution, or a one-state solution, or persuading the Israelis to allow right of return, or whatever it is that you think is the main issue. And that will strengthen your grounds for saying that Jerusalem is not the main issue. So, in the case of alcohol, it probably isn't such a great idea to go on about how alcohol is such a big problem, and of course we all accept that. But what we really need to be doing is restricting its use in a sort of tax way, rather than banning it. That's a bit similar, doesn't really strengthen your case, doesn't really allow you to rebut the other side as much as you could do. You could just say, alcohol isn't really a very big problem in our society. It's fine, most people are very responsible around it, they behave very well. We don't really think that this debate needs to be had. So does it really strengthen your case? That's the second thing, after shortness, to think about counter-propositions. If it doesn't strengthen your case, it's probably just a waste of time. Okay? Even if it doesn't actively weaken your case, it's probably just a waste of time. And finally, we've looked at this before, but it's really, really important. It's really important to think about and make sure it's kind of linked in a way to whether or not it strengthens your case. Is it mutually exclusive? Does your counter-proposition prevent the proposition from taking their action? So if you said we should educate people about the dangers of alcohol, that's how we solve the problems that it causes, then the proposition is just going to say, yep, okay, and we'll ban it. Now you can make a sophisticated argument if you want, and arguments that were clever like this were made in the junk food debate as well. Well, if it isn't there, then the education about it doesn't really mean anything because people aren't learning not to choose it, people don't see it and then make a sensible decision to eat something healthy instead. Okay, I mean that's fine, but it still doesn't really make absolutely crystal clear new water between you and your side and the other side. And in any case, you could make an argument about how people need to make a sensible choice and that this stuff needs to be there in order for them to learn about it without making education an actual counter-proposal, without saying our solution to the problems of junk food is, and then saying that you're outlining a great big kind of plan based around education. You can just drop these ideas in sometimes. They don't have to be counter-proposals. You can say, look, I'm sure that as this becomes more of an issue, schools will begin to educate people. We're already seeing that people are watching television about how bad junk food is, or people already have leaflets about how alcohol is bad for their health. So, we don't, removing it would simply be causing all these problems that we've talked about. And in any case, there are channels that people can learn about it. That's not a counterpoint, that's just saying what already happened, saying you quite like that. It's a kind of principled position that you like some approach to society to do already. You don't have to call it our counterplan or our counter-proposal. So generally speaking, you probably get the impression that I'm not a huge fan of counter-proposals. But in some cases, they are really valuable things, like I said, in solving undeniable problems in, for example, international relations, where the solution is radically different. So, for example, if we're arguing about whether or not we should invest in renewable energy sources, and you're talking about how important that is in order to cut down on our use of fossil fuels, then radically different approaches, like, for example, we need to have zero growth, massively reduce our energy consumption, we'll go back to growing our own vegetables and not using electric lights and stuff, is a radically different approach. It doesn't say, as the other side says, yeah, we need lots of electricity, we've got to find some way of producing it. It's like, actually, no, look, we need to change the whole way we look at our society, because it's, we're not going to be able to produce enough from renewable resources, it's going to be really expensive, we're going to be covering the countryside. It's symptomatic of this whole problem that we need loads of energy. Why don't we just cut down all the electricity that we use? That is the kind of counterproblem that's dramatically different. I'm not saying it's brilliant, I'm not recommending you run it, but at least it has fundamentally different underlying principles to the proposition case. So it's more powerful as a mutually exclusive counter proposal. Any questions then about coming up with plans in opposition, things to solve problems? No, Sean?
You were like cut down on the need for electricity, and the other part was.
So one side is saying like we should switch to renewable energy sources, and we need to invest loads of money and build loads of renewable energy sources. And you can give reasons why that's a very bad idea, and I'm not suggesting that you wouldn't say these things are expensive, these things don't work, these things have problems with the environment as well, there are ways that we can make fossil fuel energy use clean and all that kind of stuff. So you're still going to be having the normal debate. But on top of that, you might have a principled position that says, look, actually what society needs to do is wean itself off its incredibly high uses of energy.
Maybe the principles are different, but can't you still do both at the same time? Find a renewable energy and send out the message that we need to cut down on usage?
Oh, yeah, you could do that. Yeah, okay, so it's not mutually exclusive, that's very good. Yes. Yeah, in which case, of course, you can underlie your position case with principles that aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but which are a different approach to things. But yeah, I guess that's what I didn't phrase that very well. But yeah, that wouldn't be mutually exclusive, for example.
Okay. So
except of course that if you were like the dodgy way of doing mutually exclusive stuff is to say there's only a certain amount of money. We either spend it on renewable energy sources, or we spend it on nuclear power stations, or reducing energy consumption, or whatever. But I suppose what I mean is you're better off, even if you're not going for a counter-prop and you're not going for something that's mutually exclusive, you're better off going for something with different principles where you can have an argument about the way forward.
Okay. So you don't suggest people having a counter-proposal?
I just think if you phrase them kind of absolutely rigidly as a counter-proposal and say we're going to argue for this and then make the proposition argue against it as if they were just an opposition attacking your plan, it does kind of leave you open to the proposition ignoring it. Or you spending too much time on it.
It's like in the marriage business where you're sort of saying that neither side really has a proposal, but it's basically that, you need marriage to do this, you need marriage to do that, you need marriage to do this. The other side doesn't necessarily need to say, no, you ought to do this. They're just saying, well, you can get this other ways. Your desired solution.
Yes, exactly, yes. They're saying there are other ways to solve the problems.
Without
which is basically a straightforward rebuttal. I tell you what, a counter-proposal I've seen that has worked really well. proposition team is saying we should allow gay marriage, right? We should legalise gay marriage. Opposition team says not only should we not legalise gay marriage, but because of the principles that we stand for, we should get rid of marriage altogether. We should totally scrap the idea of any kind of legally recognised union between two people. The government should not have any role in emotional bonds whatsoever. I mean, that's a direct rebuttal of legalising gay marriage. It's definitely something we shouldn't do. Like, it's not a different debate, but it is a radically different counter-proposal. That's a good example of where it does work quite well, right? Because it actually, it kind of takes your position and strengthens it. And it means that you don't have to put up with all these annoying kind of discriminatory arguments. You're just saying, gay marriage is a bad idea because marriage is a bad idea. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll spot it on the mutually exclusive energy thing. Right. Everybody happy about that? Okay. Now we're going to look at the magic formula, the kind of argument-producing machine for any motion that proposes that we take an action or propose a policy or has any kind of plan. Okay. So I'm going to draw a picture of what all motions that involve actions look like. Whether or not these things are explicitly stated, all policy debates basically look like this. The proposition describes the world as it is now, okay? And their assumption generally is now is a problem. We don't like it. There's some kind of problem, so they present us with an issue that needs solving. They then present us with an action, something that they're going to do, and the idea is that the action will solve that problem or have some kind of effect on that problem. And finally, again, it doesn't have to be explicit, but they describe a world in the future that they're going to get to after we've taken our action, which is not only does the problem not exist, but it's better than the world that we've come from. Okay? So there's a problem in now, action solves the problem, then it's a better future. And that's why they're saying that we should take the action. So this is the bit that we're really arguing about. This is generally the motion, okay? Just using the terms now, action, and then, and sort of logical constructs and basic English words, tell me general ways that you as an opposition can find fault with this schema. What general things might be wrong? Yeah.
There is no problem.
There is no problem. So in other words, what you're saying is now has been
Exaggerate.
Now is okay.
well, there are two things you could say. On the one hand, you could say now has been misdescribed. Okay, so we don't really agree that you've got the description of the world right. You made a mistake. And in fact, I'm going to use, as far as I can, one motion to illustrate this because I find that it allows you to say almost all these things. I mean, if you have to say some of them, but if we're saying this has to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, I like this because there's a lot of arguments you can have about it, a lot of assumptions can be challenged. And the proposition stands and says, right, so global warming is happening, and that's why we need to sign the Kyoto Protocol. You say, no, global warming isn't happening. You've got all your facts wrong. No evidence whatsoever. There's a bit of temperature fluctuation here and there. Okay? But you basically misdescribed the world as it is. You're not a very good scientist. Global warming is not happening.
Can you basically still say that in a debate?
Major oil companies say that. Lots of scientists paid by those oil companies.
Okay.
Look, I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying, as an illustration of what that means you've got the world wrong at the moment. If, for example, their action is to bring back the death penalty, and they say, we've got a huge problem at the moment with crime in society, we need to bring back the death penalty. You could say, there isn't a huge problem with crime at the moment. Crime rates are at an all-time low. So, that's just not true. Okay, what else could you say? We had earlier on the phrasing of it as, there's no problem.
There is a difference then. The action will not create the then they're saying about, but a different then, which would be worse.
Oh wow, yeah, we're jumping right ahead. Yeah, okay. So action does not lead to then.
But what's the same way you can be wrong with now?
We'll come on to that in a second. Well, so we've said there's no problem, is basically what you said, Helen, as a kind of shorthand for both these things. One of them is you've misdescribed the current world. That's why it's not a problem. The second thing could be assuming that they've correctly described the modern world. In other words, assuming that they're absolutely right that global warming is happening. What would they have to say in order to claim that there wasn't a problem?
equal sources of.
That's a good thing.
Right, we could say either of those things. One of them accepts that it is a problem, doesn't it? It says it'll sort itself out, kind of implies it's a problem. To say it's a good thing, yeah, now it's good. Okay? We'll be able to sunbathe in Siberia, grow wheat in northern Canada. Global warming is actually quite a nice thing. You know, I'm looking forward to being able to have vineyard tours in England and or, have a Riviera on the Welsh coast. Okay, it's going to be fantastic. Yeah, maybe some islands will get flooded. So you can go, now, again, I'm not claiming that you do that necessarily in this debate, but it is an approach that you can take in lots of debates when some people think that things are a problem. In an economics debate claiming that we need higher taxes, the proposition starts out by saying there's a problem in society that people have different amounts of money, and this is outrageous to me as a good socialist. The opposition says, no, it's not, it's fine, I like the fact people have different amounts of money. People have different skills, people do different amounts of work. It's a good thing that there is money inequality in society. It leads to dynamism and people being able to invest and other people going out and getting jobs and working hard and all that sort of stuff. If we're on this crime argument, there's crime in society, we need the death penalty. Yeah, but actually crime is a symbol of freedom. Like, we don't want to live in such a regimented society that nobody breaks the law, because we're also absolutely terrified. It's good that we have some law breaking some of the time. It's good that people challenge society's assumptions. You wouldn't necessarily make all these arguments, but they can usually all be applied to a policy debate. Yeah, okay. What else can we say about now when we've just had one from Anya? Which is that now will sort itself out anyway. So we don't need to take any action because inherent in the nature of now is that it will go away. Crime rates are always falling, you can say. As there's less crime in society, so there are fewer problems, and everybody gets a bit better off, so there's less crime. As the Earth warms up, so the amount of plankton and algae in the oceans massively increases because the oceans are warmer. They absorb massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so then global warming slows down again, and everything goes back into equilibrium. Okay? There are kind of mechanisms, what are they called? Negative feedback mechanisms, like on a steam regulator. The thing spins faster, the ball rises, steam lets out, so it slows down again and the ball falls. So there's a natural regulating mechanism perhaps in all these things, so we don't need to worry about dealing with this problem. It's just going to go away by itself. No action is necessary. And there's one other thing we can probably say about now, that accepts that the world is how they say it is, and it is a bad thing, and it ain't going to change.
The causes, not what they're saying.
The action is wrong.
Well, specifically about now, I mean, there are things you can say about the action. What could you say about something like crime, for example, that says, yeah, there is crime, it's not a great thing, and it isn't going to go away on its own, but
Human nature.
yeah, nothing's going to make it go away. It is inevitable. It is something that we just have to accept. It's part and parcel of the way the world is. So whenever we say in debates, yeah, the world's not perfect, what we really mean is, now is inevitable. Okay? People will always commit crimes, people will always drink. Well, the Earth's warming up, but frankly that's just the planetary forces to do with the sun. Look at all the changes throughout history, how silly we are to think there's anything that we can do whatsoever. But anything can make a change to these massive planetary forces. Now is just inevitable. Okay, well, those are ways of thinking about now. Let's have a think now about what might be wrong with actions. What things can we criticise about now?
Anything to worse result.
That rather than leading to then, action is actually going to lead to something terrible. And we call it then dash. So we have and there are various ways you can say this. I mean, you could say, for example, ratifying the Kyoto Protocol will actually mean that we suddenly start the world off into a cooling spiral and we generate a new ice age. Or you could just mean that on the way to then, something else happens, kind of in the middle here, which is very, very bad that we wouldn't want to go through, which is, for example, everybody becomes really poor and we break the global economy and depression, and that's much worse actually than any of the costs that would have resulted from global warming. So there are two things that you can say about the fact that the action will cause then dash, or generally something bad. So it might be an intermediate then, or it might be a totally different final then, which is very, very different from the one that you intended to come up with. Yeah, okay. And of course, we've got action doesn't lead to them, that's already up there, just it will have no effect. You know, bringing the death penalty has absolutely no effect on the level of crime. Banning alcohol had no effect on the consumption of alcohol in the US during Prohibition. Or, more accurately, you'd probably say, in fact, it just led to alcohol being associated with crime. Again, probably more dangerous how people bring alcohol at home. So that's an example of a then dash thing. Yeah?
The cost for the action is too high.
Okay, so the action is impossible or expensive or we can't do it. I might write this up here. Yeah, so it simply is impossible to, for example, enforce the Kyoto Protocol on countries, or it isn't possible to. Action is impossible, dash expensive, slash. Well, I've actually written action impossible slash X. But look, debating is a speaking activity. You need to be able to read or write in my case. Yeah, so there might be major problems with actually being able to do the action. Now, we had a bit of a discussion yesterday in the Jerusalem debate about whether or not it's valid in the World Schools format to make an argument about the likelihood of an action actually happening as opposed to the possibility of it happening. Now, if you're saying America should ratify the Kyoto Protocol and you, let's say the Kyoto Protocol required America to spend an awful lot of money, right? I mean, in fact it doesn't, but let's just say that the treaty said, and part of that is that America has to give $200 trillion a year to every developing country, right? That would not be possible because America doesn't have that money. Therefore, it's a bad idea, okay? But if you were saying, well, it's not going to happen because George Bush would simply veto this if it were passed by Congress, and there isn't enough support anyway in either houses of Congress because people don't like voting for this because it's going to harm their jobs, so it's politically very dangerous. That's not an argument why we shouldn't do it. That's a kind of predictive argument why it's not going to happen. But if you are arguing this House, and we often just then mean the people in the room, believes that America should ratify something, it's like, do we here all think it would be a good idea or a bad idea if America did this thing? Not we are predicting that it will happen. It's not an argument that something shouldn't happen, that it's unlikely to. So there are two different things that could mean that the action is impossible. It probably is impossible to make George Bush ratify the Kyoto Protocol, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't sit down and argue with him and say that he ought to. And that doesn't mean that we would automatically be wrong, okay? You don't lose an argument with me saying, James, I really think you ought to dress more conservatively, by me saying, well, I'm not going to. And the person saying, oh, maybe I'm wrong then. The person's like, no, I'm right, it's just you're a stubborn, pig-headed fool, because you're not going to listen to my very wise advice, okay? It doesn't mean that you're wrong in the argument. So it's not an argument to say something isn't going to happen, although there's kind of political reasons why it's not going to happen, but it is an argument to say that it's impossible, or, that it can't happen. Now, there are consequences from people's real-world political opinions, okay, which do make things difficult. So, if we say it's impossible that we would ever create a UN city in Jerusalem because the US will veto it, well, okay, maybe we're assuming that we've persuaded the US and they're not going to veto it. But that doesn't mean that the US administration is perhaps going to be happy with it, so they're probably still not going to commit troops or whatever. So, that is a kind of perfectly valid argument. What are the likely reactions of countries going to be? But that doesn't mean that you can just automatically say it's not going to happen until we win the debate. Okay, there's another good couple of action problems that we can come up with.
It's not applied. It can't be justified.
Yeah, so what was the second thing you said?
It can't be justified.
Yeah, it's wrong, and can't be justified, morally wrong, whatever, that's good. Bring back the death penalty, you say? Well, even if it would work, it's a contravention of fundamental human rights. It's morally wrong. It's abhorrent that the state should kill people. We often say actions are morally wrong, and what we mean by that is, as we discussed yesterday, that action doesn't fit in with a whole other web of morals that we've worked out. And if we were going to take that action, then in order to be consistent, we'd have to do away with a lot of our moral tenets that prevent us from taking other much worse actions. So we can say that's why we shouldn't do it, because the action's been really wrong. What else can we say then? We've just spent a load of time discussing this kind of response. But, I mean, I said you shouldn't do it formally, but it's still a perfectly reasonable argument to make if you're opposing.
Not the best way.
It's not the best way to solve things. There is, in fact, a better action. There we go. Action dash. Okay, or action 2, whatever. Yeah, so, okay, you want to control global warming. Well, I wouldn't suggest that you ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Surely what you need to do is encourage technology transfers or carbon trading. I wouldn't suggest that you introduce the death penalty to deal with crime. I would suggest that you spend more money on education or that you rehabilitate people. Now, as I said, these aren't necessarily counter-proposals, right? Because they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can do them alongside. So I'm not saying that your opposition to their plan is that this would happen. But it is nevertheless something that must stand on validity and the sensibleness of their action, especially if you only take one action, right? Especially if there's a limited amount of money. Then you can be able to say, look, actually, this isn't really a good way to go about solving these problems. You're probably going to want to combine that with some of the other things that we've already looked at. Okay, well, we're doing pretty well, but right there then I suppose is number 5. Better action. These notes really are more for my purposes than yours. That's why they're totally right, what can we say about then?
That it's not a better place.
Okay, yeah, so that's the first and most obvious thing. Then is in fact worse than that. A world in which we've banned alcohol, goodness me, that would be terribly dull and very unenjoyable. So whatever you say, you think about the problems of alcohol, actually, I just don't want to live in a world with alcohol. I don't want to live in a world with a curfew. I don't want to live in a world where we all have to count our carbon all the time and there's no economic growth and all these sort of, worry about that sort of stuff.
Short term versus long term, as in maybe then is good, but on a short term basis, it can't go beyond that.
This is very good. Can I just say, by the way, you guys are the best group I've done this with since the extraordinary Singaporean 14-year-olds. We managed to get 18 of these. We're going to stop probably at 12 or 13 unless you can think of some more. But never have I had a group as good as you. You certainly have longer as well, I think. So yeah, then is temporary. Okay, so we have this problem with inequality in society, so we're going to take loads of money from rich people and we're going to give it to poor people like me and PJ who need to make a fortune, okay? But and that way we're going to even things out. But we're not going to change anything else, so what's going to happen in the long run? Well, me and PJ are going to drink and gamble all our money away, and it's going to be taken by those clever bar owners and casino managers, and eventually we'll just end up poor again and then end up rich again, because that's the natural way of things. Inequality will spread through society, so why are you even bothering to put this in place? It's just a temporary thing, it's not going to last. Yeah, good.
Could you say that then the dash is better? Or is that simple? Similar to then is worse than now?
Well, I suppose you could say that we want a different kind of future, but I suppose, yeah, I mean, I don't know, that is worse than now, better than possible, I don't know. That sounds a bit too much like a counter-prop. If you're going to argue that we shouldn't get rid of alcohol because what we really want is a world without drugs, I think that's probably that's going too far away from the dropping in possible other actions we could take, not as a counter-prop, but as just a criticism of this action. And that's going too far towards that we're having a whole different debate here, actually. There's a whole different problem and a different solution, a different future that we will deal with.
When you say that then will trigger some events which will do a lot of bad, let's say for example, we would use alternative oils for production, and then while using these oils and now somehow we would harm nature even more, or subsidies would go up or something like that.
Yeah, so then it has other problems, which in fact turns it into a now. I mean, a great example of actions like that is the Australians saying, We have a problem that we don't really have very much meat in Australia, and easy, nice to catch European meat. So we'll introduce rabbits, because they breed quite fast, and they're quite easy to catch, and delicious rabbit casserole. And then we'll have a future of lots of nice cheap rabbit meat for everybody. Oh no! Rabbits are exploding, they're destroying the natural habitat, they have no natural predators. We've created a whole big problem here. Or
Let's
we have a problem with too many rabbits in Australia. Let's introduce myxomatosis. Oh no, we have a problem with loads of native animals getting this horrible disease, and it's a complete disaster. Okay, so solutions quite often contain the kernels of later problems.
Is it a legitimate argument to say basically that we don't deny that there's a problem in now, but that in the scheme of things, like, I mean, maybe there's a problem with alcohol, but in the scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal? Like, to put your money towards enforcement of a ban on alcohol is poor allocation of funds when there are bigger problems on our plate. Is that a legitimate argument, or does it basically concede that, yeah, there's a problem, maybe we should do something about it, but there are bigger problems?
Yeah, but I was wondering.
It's like going after the small fish in the pond when there's a big fish to catch.
Well, I mean, it is an argument that you hear made. The problem is that we do spend governments do quite a lot of kind of minor things, and we probably want to debate about more exciting stuff than those minor things. But does that mean that we definitely shouldn't do it, or are you just saying it's a little bit expensive? If it were less money, then it would be, then the amount of money would match the problem. I mean, I think you either need to say,
Opportunity cost.
yeah, the opportunity cost means that we can't take other actions, which is it's a perfectly valid point to make. I mean, I think essentially what you're saying is now isn't really a problem. You're saying, yeah, we kind of accept obviously that some people get a bit drunk, some people get addicted. Is that a problem, to the extent that we need to have an action to solve it? No, it's just kind of the way society is. I think that's basically what you're saying.
So it's not legitimate to say that basically we accept the fact that there might be a problem with the fact that people are getting drunk, but when we consider that millions of people are living in poverty, to allocate our resources towards preventing people from getting drunk is a poor
well, okay, I mean, this is a difficult thing. This is something you see quite often. It's called like starving babies argument, which basically goes along the lines of, you want government to subsidise the arts, but there are children starving in Africa. You want the government to build more nuclear weapons, there are children starving in Africa. You want the government to research DNA coding, there are children starving in Africa. Like, to absolutely any proposal bar feeding children in Africa. The answer is, how dare you, there are children starving in Africa. I'm going to sell my mobile phone and, post my shoes to Ethiopia and it's generally a fairly weak opposition. We have lots and lots of things that we have to do. There are loads of different government budgets, there's lots of earmarked funds, there's lots of, and people just say, oh look, we already try and do things about stuff in Ethiopia. We're not just going to throw all our money at it. That's not a solution to the problem anyway. We've got to carry on doing other things at the same time. I think basically, what you're saying is either there is a problem that needs to be solved, we accept that, in which case you just can't ignore the fact that they present a solution. You might say the solution is counterproductive or impossible or there's a better one or something. Or there isn't a problem that needs to be solved. That's really what it means when they say there's a problem. I mean, there's a problem that needs to be solved. Not just there's a problem. Like, there's a problem that, it seems that whenever I go outside it rains and I haven't got my umbrella with me. Well, that is a problem. It's not exactly a problem that needs to be solved. You wouldn't say, I've got this thing, I've really got to sort it out. It always rains when I go outside. It's not a problem that needs to be solved. In just the same way that, some people get addicted to alcohol, or people lose their money gambling, or sometimes businesses fail and go bankrupt. These aren't nice things, they're problems. But would we say in society, this is a problem that needs solving, come on, let's sit down around the table and come up with a solution for it. If you accept that it is a problem that needs solving, then you can't just say, well, we shouldn't bother, it's not very big. But if you say, I'm not saying this is great, but it's not a problem that needs solving, what you're basically saying is, not necessarily now is good, the combination of now is misdescribed, now is good. It's like, this isn't great, but that's just, it's a bit like now is inevitable, not the way the world is. We shouldn't.
So in generally the debate, if you say that there are other problems we should focus our resources on, that's not in the debate, right? When we're talking about a specific problem.
I mean, you can say it, like as part of the action is expensive. I guess what we mean by expensive is we could have spent the money on something else, we could talk about opportunity cost. But like, it shouldn't be the core plank of your case. You've still got to say why it's a bad idea, why there are problems with it, whatever. Because if you just say there are other things we should spend our money on, then the proposition might just say, yeah, but we've got a lot of money.
Can you say that the den that you propose is sort of like stifling against people's rights, like a world where no one drinks, that's sort of against your rights and stuff.
Yeah, and that then is worse than now, or better than would be possible. Yeah, you can definitely say, look, this then is horrible. A world where we have teenage curfews in order to prevent crime, you know, may well have an impact on crime. Do we really want to like, imprison our under 18s so that they can't enjoy
Goes
themselves?
against principle.
Yeah, well, it's just not very well. Any number of different reasons. I mean, you come up with the reasons. You know, it goes against principles. It's not very nice. Whatever. I mean, there could be any number of problems, which then sort of turns into three. You know, if it actually creates the problem.
Is the slippery slope argument ever effective? I've never seen
Yes.
it used effectively. Like if we
Well,
let
it's not an argument. It's a fallacy. Slippery slope is a fallacy. What you actually mean is it ever possible to show that by taking one action, another action is inevitably going to follow? And if you can show why that is the case, then it's a perfectly good argument, right? But if you just say, oh my goodness, today we're legalizing cannabis, tomorrow it'll be heroin, it's a slippery slope. That's actually just a fallacy. I mean, that's why it's called the slippery slope fallacy. But you've got to show why. For example, if you say, we should not pass, and this was an argument that was had in the UK Parliament quite recently. There was something called the Civil Contingencies Act, and then there was a very similar act called the something like the Executive Powers Act or something. And they were both supposed to streamline the government's response to emergencies and to terrorism. And one of the clauses that they contain, or some of the main clauses, were ministers will have the power to make changes to any act of Parliament without consulting Parliament, simply in order to speed up the way we respond to emergencies. And the argument was made, for example, they'll be able to make changes to acts of Parliament about how and when we can deliver medicine, or what the army can be deployed to do, or whether or not we can shut down airports, or people's right to travel. These kind of things can be restricted in the event of a national emergency. Because what people said was, well, hold on. Once you allow ministers to do that, there's going to be a temptation to remove those parts of Acts of Parliament that require them to justify those actions or explain them because they're going to be short of time. The minister is always rushing around, they don't like answering all the questions. So maybe they change those Acts of Parliament sections that require, that have scrutiny over what ministers are doing. Maybe that would mean then that once they've done that, they've got kind of a cloak of secrecy and of non-accountability, which means they're going to be increasing their pay, or they're going to be doing other things that ministers would like to do that normally Parliament stops them from doing. So you've kind of reasoned out some kind of slippery slope. There's something about the first action, in other words, giving ministers powers to do things without parliamentary scrutiny, that leads on to ministers doing more things without parliamentary scrutiny. So they can remove other types of scrutiny, they can remove media intrusion into what they're doing. And it's very tempting for ministers to use power in a way that they would think would be good. So that's kind of reasoned out. But just saying, gosh, if we pass this particular law, then we'll soon be in a dictatorship, doesn't really stand up.
What if you
Just
say
to reassure you, both those bills got defeated.
Unless you can prove it.
Yeah, unless you can prove it, yeah. Well, unless you show the steps.
Yeah, okay. I've just seen people be like, oh, because if we allow people to marry anyone, then of course they'll start to marry anything. And you're like, what? Where is this coming from?
Then you're making a fallacy when you do that.
Yeah.
policies and
Yeah, people are like,
But if you can show that there is a
if we
demand
allow
out
people
there.
to get married, I can marry a chair. I've seen that done quite literally in the law. And it was the finals of a tournament. I was like, you got there? What?
Yeah, we had a national final. The dude talked about marrying a horse. So yeah.
Which I believe is legal in Louisiana.
I'm not sure.
He's kidding.
what if you say that the then does not happen, and it's not exist with your action, or if you say that it's not.
So the action doesn't lead to them.
Yeah.
Because that's really more about the action than about them. Because then isn't there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the other thing you could say, but to be honest, it's a little bit similar, I suppose, to that. A little bit similar to action, not then, would be then is the same as now. And that's basically just another way of doing that, but in a then form.
So basically, it's like saying you take this action and just
No
change.
change.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah. A world where people people have the death penalty, will there be just as much crime in it, be just as awful. Can anybody else think of any more? We're up to, I think, now 13.
14. Oh, 13 and a half.
Yeah, 13 and a half. Singaporeans,
That then will take so long to happen that we won't see it in our lifetime, and like even when it happens, it will have such a low effect that we'll solve it other.
And how do you intend to prove?
Then
Then it takes too long to manifest.
yeah, okay.
It will have effect for our children.
That's a bit like saying the action takes too long.
But then, if we agree that it happens, then you lose the case, right? You agree that their method works, and it will give some benefit.
Because we say that
What's the
during that
benefit when
long
you don't
time
need it
there
anymore?
are going to be a lot
So
of...
we need it anymore.
So let's say
Hold on, one at a time.
it will
Let's-
solve African.
Hold on, so just a second. Let's just,
Oh,
let's do that
Sean said that what if it takes a really, really long time to spend? And she just said that, well, isn't art me admitting that the action will take place? But couldn't we say that because it takes such a long time, there will be a lot of more deficits?
Yeah, I mean, if you say we need to solve global warming today, so we're going to put in place a system which will mean that we have less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 100 years' time, then that's not really a solution to the problem. I mean, that's basically just saying the action won't work.
We don't really have that, do we?
I guess not. I mean, I guess it's, yeah.
This number 5 is what?
Action.
Ineffective.
Ineffective election won't work. Yeah,
We
okay.
already have
We
something
already
that
have
doesn't
5.
lead to,
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think
we
probably...
already have 5 under the action, we have better action, number 5.
Oh yeah, so that's it.
But like, isn't that the same as the first one with the action? Like, it won't lead to the then.
I mean, a lot of these are quite logically similar, to be honest. I think you'd be
James, what is this?
casting around.
So can we say we just in the long term? Let's say, for example, the provision. Okay, I'm the type president. So a provision comes out of the plan that every country would give, let's say, 100 euros per year for aid in Africa. Okay, and therefore it would take like 1,500 years in order to solve all the problems in Africa. Can we like say, well, yeah, but there are like so many things that go on at the time. I mean, African poverty can be solved beforehand. They can get instinct. They can like.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's not, you know, a bit similar to John's description yesterday, saying you proposed this good. You know, you said you're going to get $100 for everyone. You open your wallet, you find actually there's only $50 in it. People aren't going to refuse your $50 because it's not good enough. I think you'd also have to show that there were problems involved with the action.
What if you die before you get $50?
Well, that hasn't been done any harm, so then what we're really saying is kind of X negative X. It's certainly something you might want to bear in mind, you might want to bring up, but it wouldn't be the basis of a decision strategy, yeah. Okay, well, I think what we might do now is have a 10-minute break, and then we'll have an hour in which to do exercises. You guys should still have in your notes the proposition cases that we built up the other day.
Yeah.
And I said to you at the time you were going to be doing oppositions to these when we play opposition strategies, yeah? Yeah, so that's what we'll be doing. We'll be coming up with those, and then we'll be, I think we did 3, didn't we? Prepared for 3 motions when we were case building. So we'll do each of those 3. And what I'm going to ask is for volunteers then to come up and just go through their opposition strategies on the board and explain which of these positions they use to build their opposition strategy to that particular case. Okay? So 10-minute break now and then exercising.